These are the main stories.
The immediate departure of Muammar Gaddafi within 72 hours.
Negotiating an exit, Libya's opposition says Gaddafi will not be prosecuted at home if he steps down in the next 3 days. Meanwhile, there's been intense fighting in Ras Lanuf, a key Libyan oil terminal, amid reports of several airstrikes.
And in London, I'm Felicity Barr with the latest from Europe, including $100 million a day. We take a look at the amount Libya is losing in oil revenue since the uprising began.
Violence breaks out in a Yemeni prison as the anti-government uprising continues throughout the country. Thousands take to the streets in Côte d'Ivoire in anger at the killing of 7 unarmed female protesters. Stop the bombing and leave within 72 hours. In return, Gaddafi would not face prosecution at home. That's the message to Gaddafi from the head of the National Council in Libya. Mustafa Abdul Jalil told Al Jazeera the Libyan leader must go to prevent further bloodshed. Elsewhere in Libya, there are more developments. There's been fighting in AlJazeera outside the capital, Tripoli. State television has shown pictures of the military in what they say is the recaptured town. But the rebels say they're still in the city. Moving east to Bin Jawad, state television showed this footage of people, it says, were brainwashed into joining the rebellion against Colonel Gaddafi. And in Ras Lanuf, witnesses say there have been as many as 6 airstrikes there. Reports suggest residents are leaving in a hurry. We'll have more on the fighting in a moment. But first, Lawrence Lee has more on the ultimatum facing Muammar Gaddafi.
For a man with such a strong line in bombast and exaggeration, the suggestion of Gaddafi making a deal on the quiet which would allow him to escape Libya unscathed is startling. It's claimed he raised the suggestion on Sunday when opposition forces were on the road to Sirte, his hometown, and before the Libyan army had retaken the town of Bin Jawad and pushed the rebels back. According to Al Jazeera sources in Libya, Gaddafi's main demands were aimed far less at ensuring the future of his country and far more at making sure that he and his family could continue living in luxury. So it's alleged that Gaddafi wanted assurances that he wouldn't be prosecuted for crimes against humanity, that he and his family would be able to leave to a country of his choosing, and that he would retain assets, many of which have been seized in countries from Europe to Japan. The message back from Benghazi to Gaddafi was equally specific: end the bombing and get out of Libya within 72 hours.
We see no objection in ending bloodshed among the Libyans in return for 2 key demands. First, Muammar Gaddafi stopping air and inland bombardment of Zawiya, Misrata and Ras Lanuf. Second, his immediate departure within 72 hours. And in return, we guarantee that he will not be prosecuted domestically.
What prompted Gaddafi to fold in this way is unclear, since his troops have been gaining ground. Perhaps as well as fears about prosecution, he's becoming concerned about the growing pressure from the international community to raise the threat of a military response.
We've got NATO, as we speak, consulting in Brussels around a wide range of potential options, including potential military options, in response to the violence that continues to take place inside of Libya.
There may be many ordinary people in Benghazi who see Gaddafi's demands as outrageous, and perhaps the authorities too. But equally, if Gaddafi were to leave the country, they could surely still claim an historic victory, and the authorities in Benghazi are certainly concerned about saving lives as well. Inevitably, Libyan state TV has denied an offer even being made. The next move now surely belongs to Gaddafi. One final point: how Gaddafi's own soldiers feel about the prospect of being abandoned may prove interesting as well. Lawrence Lee, Al Jazeera.
Well, our correspondent Anita McNaught joins me on the line from Tripoli now. Anita, a lot of talk about these secret negotiations going on between Gaddafi's regime and the National Council. What are you hearing there?
In Tripoli, as ever, the information flows far less freely. And I'm in one of the two holding pens that the authorities set up here for journalists, this one being the Rixos Hotel, the other being the Currency on the other side of town. What we've been aware of ever since arriving is that the Gaddafi governing bloc is not monolithic, that it has within it conservatives and reformists, and that the struggle between the two of them has been going on for quite some time. But what form this is taking, who is pushing this initiative, whether we're now seeing a split within the ruling regime, or whether this is an escape plan for most of them, all of this is yet to be understood fully.
But are you getting the impression there that the regime, and Gaddafi in particular, is feeling the pressure from the increasing international clamour?
You don't get an impression here of anything directly. It's all inferred. You have to understand that most of us, for almost all of us, I think, since we arrived, our contact with ordinary Libyans in and around Tripoli has been extremely constrained. We are never alone to talk to people. There are always members of the security services with us. So the ability to have free conversations about how people feel about Muammar Gaddafi, what they would like to see as an alternative to the government here. These are conversations had in hushed corners. These are conversations had in quiet alleyways. These are conversations had in snatched moments where people think they've caught you alone and have momentarily escaped the surveillance. So you're aware of a city that is deeply unhappy. You're aware of a city that has both die-hard, passionate Gaddafi supporters and people who live in constant terror and dread of the regime. But beyond that, there is no open discussion in any media domestically of these issues whatsoever. In fact, there are only denials. I mean, the rumor broke last night that Muammar Gaddafi was thinking of stepping down, and that was met instantly with a rebuttal from the state media. So there is no discussion, no meaningful discussion of any sort at all about these issues in Libya itself.
And, you know, if it turns out that Gaddafi has been, or Gaddafi's people have been talking about a possible escape plan, that would be quite something, given he's been so vehement in the past about, you know, staying in Libya until he dies and fighting to the last drop of blood.
Well, it's an extraordinarily rapid shift of position, an absolute 180-degree turn, and the speed at which this has happened is very surprising. Because I think what many people here felt was that the wrath of Gaddafi's military was yet to be fully called into play, as we tried to make sense of why clearly he wasn't averse to shedding life. So why were we not seeing greater casualties, greater use of the army, greater deployment of the paramilitaries? Was that because, in some strange way, he was staying his own hand and unwilling to ultimately kill as many people as perhaps he was capable of? Or was it because, in fact, he didn't feel that he any longer had the loyalty of many of the military nominally under his command, and that if he really called them out, they wouldn't do it? We've seen constant reports of bombing raids where the pilots have mysteriously dropped bombs that haven't exploded or have missed their targets. I mean, these things are impossible to gauge, because no one from the military, apart from the ones who switched sides early on, have come out now and said, this is how it feels to us. There has been no